in the past, I've not been immune myself to the trappings of the devil and his egoic control. I mean, I did a video before about how I used to be a fearaholic, and that is pretty well the biggest control that he has over people, is creating fear in them. So for me, I have always seemed to be worried about what people seem to think about me. I try not to care in the past, and because of that, that creates fear. At the same time, I've kind of been afraid of success. When you do go and try and do things that could help you be successful in whatever you're trying to do, it almost seems like you're getting all this negativity coming into your thoughts about how it's gonna fail or how you're gonna fail. And it's also telling you how things aren't gonna work out in the end. And most of those things aren't even true. Most of the time, you don't have any proof that any of those things are actually gonna happen or actually gonna be true. It's just the way of your ego controlling you and keeping you from your greatness. So that's why all the millionaire teachers and even the spiritual gurus, they all tell you that if you want to become successful, you need to change your habits. So not only do you need to change the people that you're hanging around, but you need to also change your habits. And the reason you need to change your habits is because one of your habits is you saying to yourself, you're gonna fail. So if you're saying to yourself that you're gonna fail all the time, then you lose the ambition to actually want to go out and try. So that's why they say don't worry about what your voice inside your head's telling you. They're saying go out and do it anyways. I've been in the trap where I've been working a full-time job and there's things that you want to do, but you keep putting them off because you keep coming up with these excuses of there's not enough time after work, or I'm too tired. Like you can come up with millions of excuses, and we all do it, but the millionaire gurus and the spiritual gurus tell you do something. Even though you're coming up with all these excuses, they're saying go spend 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever time you have, spend some time doing what you know you should be doing or you know you could be doing. They said you don't have to finish the entire task in one day. If you do, great, but if you don't, that's okay too. But just put some time into it every day. And they said sometimes the hardest part is getting started. So sometimes once you get started, then you get way more done in that 15 minutes than you thought you were gonna do. Or you'll end up going and finding out you had more time than 15 minutes to do it, and you'll spend more time doing it every night, and you'll get even way more accomplished than what you expected to get accomplished. But they're saying you just need to start somewhere. And I found that when I get stuck, when I'm working a full-time job and I get stuck and I'm wanting to get something done, but all the excuses are popping up in my head, it is very hard to fight against it. That's why they say just don't think about it and just do it anyways. Just go ahead and start something. So when I've been caught in my monotony of working a job, coming home, having to cook supper and eat, and feeling like you don't have much time, you actually always have more time than what you actually think you do. Because a lot of nights I would sit there and I would spend more time eating than what I needed to. And the reason I'd spend more time eating is because not only would I eat supper, but then after I was done eating supper, I would snack because I would be bored because I would be watching TV or something. So then you get bored and you get snacky, so then you end up eating more food. I used to have a bad habit of gluttony, basically, because I spent about 10 years of my life where I was never hungry because I would just keep eating all the time. I would just eat because I thought it was time to eat, not because I was hungry. I would always overeat to the point where I was so full that there was no way I could eat anymore. So I mean, when I ate, I would eat till I was filled to capacity. And then if I didn't feel like I was completely topped up, then that was my sign to go eat again. So I mean, I'm surprised I didn't get to be like 400 pounds because I was eating almost all the time. I was eating just to eat for for many, many years, and it was a bad habit, and it was basically an addiction. Like, it's not much different of an addiction really than drinking or smoking. But the problem with food addiction is that when you're eating all the time and you want to cut down on eating, then you got to start trying to get into fasting or cutting down on portion sizes. But when you don't eat what you're used to eating and you're feeling hungry, it's really hard to fight that off unless you literally go into a cold turkey fast, right? Because I mean, you can quit smoking cold turkey, you can quit drinking cold turkey, and that's just as hard as quitting eating cold turkey. But the difference with quitting eating cold turkey is you can only do it for so long, and then you have to eat again. So you can't just never eat again. I mean, so it's always a constant battle when you have an eating addiction to keep yourself from overfeeding all the time. Like, every time you go eat, you always have to fight that feeling. Quitting smoking and quitting drinking would be harder if it was like a food addiction. I think the food addiction is the worst addiction you can have, because you can't not eat. You have to eat at some point in time, and as soon as you eat, those feelings of wanting to fill yourself up to the point where you couldn't even eat anymore, I mean, those addictions and those feelings come up every time you eat. So it's a constant battle. It's almost like trying to quit smoking without quitting smoking. I mean, you can't quit very easily smoking if you continue to smoke. But that's pretty much what you're having to do with the food addiction, is you're trying to quit eating, but you have to still eat. So I think that a food addiction and gluttony is probably the hardest addiction to probably curb. And I mean, to curb it, you literally have to go on long, prolonged fasts. You know, times where your mind's telling you, oh, look, we need to eat, and you're like, nope, we're not gonna eat, right? Because you need to prove to yourself that, and prove to your subconscious that eating isn't a necessity, that you're not gonna die just because you don't eat for a while. Like, you don't have to eat every day, and you don't have to eat like 3 times a day. You need to prove that to your subconscious, that it's okay, it's not going to kill you to stop eating for a week. Right? Like, and you need to prove that to yourself, because that's one of the big things about trying to stay healthy, is they always tell you, well, eat smaller portions throughout the day, but eat more often. Then they're saying that it'll keep your metabolism going, so you'll burn more energy in a day. Well, I found that hurt my addiction. It basically took my addiction and made it worse, because now instead of having in my mind, oh, I gotta eat 3 times a day, now I'm thinking, oh, I gotta eat like 8 times a day. But instead of just eating a little bit 8 times a day, because I'm used to overfeeding every time I feed, I would still overfeed, but I was overfeeding more often now. It kind of made it worse. So the only thing that made me losing weight possible and keeping the weight off was fasting, and getting into my mind, look, you don't have to eat 16 times a day. So now, instead of eating 3 times a day or 8 times a day, I now eat once a day, right? Because there's the keto diet has intermittent fasting usually linked in with it. So they say that the longer you go without eating, so if you sleep for 8 hours, and then if you can not eat for the next 8 hours while you're awake, which I've always woke up and not been hungry, so they say if you can stretch that out to 8 hours and have a 16-hour fast, and then you eat once a day, well, I found the longer I do that, then the less, when I do eat that one meal a day, the less tendency I have to overfill myself in that 8-hour window of eating. I seem to eat smaller portions, and I mean, when you do that often enough, you're gonna shrink your stomach, right? So I found that intermittent fasting and fasting for longer periods helped with my mentality. It helped with my thoughts of feeling like I needed to eat all the time, and it helped with my addiction of overfeeding myself. That's the only way I've been able to get the weight off and keep the weight off is by doing keto and intermittent fasting, and then longer prolonged like 3-day fasts or 7-day fasts to prove to my subconscious that I'm not gonna die just because I haven't ate in 2 or 3 days. Because I mean, that's one belief system that you seem to get, is you feel, oh well, this is unhealthy for me and I'm not gonna survive if I don't eat. Well, you can survive periods of time without eating. So that was one of my addictions that I had in the past that I had to fight against. And so with my time where I was kind of living subconsciously, because I mean, it gets very mundane having to go to work every day and then coming home and cooking supper and eating, and then by the time you're done that, I mean, you got like an hour or two to watch a TV program or play some video games, and then you're going to bed so you can get up early the next day and go do the same thing. So I found that when I get caught in that monotony, like that's one way the devil catches you subconsciously as well, because he gets you caught in that monotony intentionally and tries to intentionally control you throughout. And using that monotony, the way he tries to control you through that is he tells you, like, you're talking in your head and you're basically saying to yourself, or you think you're saying to yourself, but it could be your ego, which Satan uses and controls, which I talked about in the last video. And it could be him talking to you saying, hey, go ahead and not do the things that you think you need to do. Just go and watch TV, or just go and play those video games. Don't worry about doing the other things because you don't have time for doing those things. So that's the way that the ego controls you so that you can't grow. I mean, if you do an online course, because there's something that you want to get into, so you go do an online course for it, and you're studying for that class to pass it so you can do what you want to do in your life. That particular class, you don't need to spend all night every night studying for it. But I mean, if you're going through and reading for a half an hour about that course, or an hour or whatever, and you take a little bit of time out of every night, some nights you're going to get caught up in it and you're going to do it all night, and some nights you're only going to do it for a little bit. But if you let the excuses weigh you down, then you're never going to get studied to the point where you can pass that final exam. So no matter what you're doing, it's the same idea. You do a little bit every night. That's what the professionals tell you to do, is do a little bit every night, no matter what it is, to progress yourself forward. Whether it's studying about something that interests you. I mean, we all need to do something outside of work that interests us to progress towards our dream life, right? So I found that when I was getting weighed down and bogged down in the monotony of life, I found I was falling for those excuses and not progressing myself, because I would let the excuses determine what I was gonna do. So nights where I knew I shouldn't have been watching TV or shouldn't have been playing video games, I was anyways. And you could come up with tons of excuses, but when you say no to those excuses, a ton more of excuses come up. So I think it's a battle for everybody, but I know that there was times where I was literally asleep, like times where I wasn't even thinking, oh, what steps can I take to improve my life? I was like so asleep, I would literally just go through the steps every day of work and go through the steps every day of my night routine, and I thought I was planning and thinking and strategizing. But I mean, then you come to a point where you just wake up and have a moment of clarity and find out how your excuses have been holding you back. And the second that you realize how those excuses have been holding you back, you all of a sudden, it just clicks and you're like, man, I've been asleep. Like, I have all these things that I want to do, but I don't even think of ways to do them after work. I just literally have been going through my day not even thinking about how to improve my life, and I've been caught in this monotony, and I need to wake up from it. And I mean, sometimes you can stay awake from that longer than you can in other times. I mean, sometimes you wake up the next morning and boom, the thought that you had the night before about how you need to start following your dreams has disappeared now, and you're caught in the mindless monotony again. Sometimes you can remind yourself, hey, I need to, do this to progress my life. And then, so as long as you can think over and over and over, when you made the decision, I need to do this to improve my life, as long as as you can keep thinking it and bringing it up, you have a chance to say no to the ego when the ego comes up with those excuses. But when you're caught deeply in the monotony, it's almost like you're walking around like a zombie, because you're not even thinking of the things you want to do. You're not even thinking of the way of getting yourself out of the monotony. Like, and here's a perfect example. Like, I always wanted to go play in the World Series of Poker down in Vegas, and I always wanted to play in the main event, but I always at least wanted to go down there and play in some tournaments. But I always seemed to find excuses to not go. So I mean, instead of saving up the money to go, I would go and spend the money, and then I would say, oh, well, I don't have any money to go, and that was my excuse to not go. But I mean, I could have planned and plotted and intentionally saved up the money to make sure I had the money to go, but I always came up with excuses. Or, you know, then the time came for the World Series of Poker events, and you're thinking to yourself, it's time to go down there, and you're like, I do have a little bit of money, but you're like, oh, I don't have time, right? I'm working a full-time job, yada yada yada. I don't have time to go down there, because I would only be able to go down there for like the weekend, and it's almost not worth the fight just going down there for the weekend. But I mean, someone who is determined to be successful in a certain thing, they will not use the excuse, oh, it's only a weekend. I mean, they will save up more money than what they need to go down there, right? So they'll put off not buying stuff just so they can go down there. They won't go out there and buy things on a whim, just because, ooh, I had this thought that maybe this is something I need, yada yada yada, right? They'll hardcore save for it, make sure they have more money than what they need for it. Then they'll say, it doesn't matter if I only have 2 days, I'll fly down there and I'll play for 1 day if I have to, and I'll play in at least one event for 1 day. So they don't care how much the flight is, they don't care if it seems like a waste, they just don't let the excuse hamper them, and they'll fly down there at least for 1 day. Well, maybe the first year they only get down there for 1 day playing one tournament, and then the next year they might get down there for a week, because now they have even more money, and maybe they'll plan their holidays around work and take a whole week off on holidays to go down there. And now they got way more saved, because now they've had 2 years to save, and now they get to go down there and play in multiple events. So there was 1 year where I was like sleeping, caught in my monotony, coming up with the excuses of not going. Well, World Series of Poker time came around. It was time for me to either go or not go. And I mean, there was tons of excuses. Like, I had money saved up to go. There was tons of excuses that I was using that were coming up in my head about me not to go. And I literally just made the decision, because I was working a week on and a week off, so I had the time, but I mean, there were still excuses coming up. And I was thinking, well, you know, I could always not go play in the World Series and save the money and continue playing poker here for that time off. And I finally just made the decision, you know what, I'm just going to go and do it. I'm just gonna take that week off, I'm gonna plan it, I'm gonna play whatever events happen to be available at that point in time, and I'm just gonna go do it and just forget the excuses, forget the fears of doing it, and just go do it. So I went and finally did it, and I'm glad I did it. I didn't really, I didn't make it to day 2 on any of the events I played in, which sucked because I was close almost every tournament to day 2. I just pretty much became card dead at the end of every day, and you can only sit there so long with blind structures going up before you gotta go all in on something. So I mean, I didn't have any success, but it was nice to go down there and do it anyways, and I was close to day 2. So I mean, once you make it to day 2, then that's when you start getting into the money, right? So it was a good experience, and I'm glad I got to go down there. And I didn't get to play in the World Series main event, but that's okay, because I played in some World Series events at least, right? So when you decide to go and do the things that you want to do, there'll be other curveballs and other obstacles that will be thrown in your way when you finally wake up, you finally make the choice to go do something that you've wanted to do. You go make the decision you're going to progress towards your perfect life. I mean, Satan always seems to find a way to throw you extra curveballs in that process, because I mean, he loves keeping you asleep and keeping you with your excuses. And when you find ways through those excuses, I mean, he will find other ways to throw curveballs at you to stop you from doing what you're doing. So I mean, once you make the decision, well, I'm not going to sit around, I'm not going to watch TV anymore, and you decide that you're going to start spending that half an hour every night doing something towards your goal, towards your dream life, he will find ways to throw other obstacles in front of you. So the curveball that was thrown at me when I finally decided to go down and play in the World Series event, and I picked the weekend I was going to go down. I looked up the tournaments I was going to play in that week when I was off work, and I came up with all the plans of all the tournaments I wanted to play in, when I wanted to fly down there, the week I was going to go, how long I was going to be down there for, and I finally made the decision that I'm not going to let the excuses hold me back. I was just going to go and I was going to do it. I ended up going into work my last day, the weekend before I was supposed to go down for the week, and ended up finding out that I lost my job. There was no inclination that I was going to lose my job at any point in time. I mean, it just came out of the blue, and it's almost like Satan was like, oh, you're going to go down and do something to progress towards your dream. You're not going to fall for my excuses anymore. Well, here, take this. You no longer have a job. Now maybe you won't go down and follow your dreams. So it's almost like he put the most ultimate, because I mean, now I'm thinking, oh, well, how long am I going to be out of a job for? Maybe I should save that money now and use that money towards bills in the future, because I don't know how long I'm going to be out of work for. I mean, so now you come up with a whole shitload of other excuses that are trying to stop you from going. I said screw it, and I went anyways, because I had made the decision that I was going to do it, and I'm not going to allow the devil to take over my life and to stop me from doing something that I already made the decision to do. But that's basically what it seemed like he was trying to do, is to stop me. I finally made a decision to do something good for my life, do something I've always wanted to do, and he puts like the ultimate obstacle in front of me to try to stop me from doing it. But I said screw it, and I went and did it anyways, and I'm glad I did it, because I mean, who knows when I'm gonna get the chance to ever do it again. The excuses can only go so far. You can only let the excuses hold you back for so long. I mean, eventually you got to stand up and you got to do it. Otherwise, you end up a life of monotony to the point where you're married to the person you don't want to be married to. Your kids are turning out to the type of kids that you don't want to have. I mean, you're working a dead-end job that you're never going to be able to get a promotion in. You're working a job that doesn't pay you the amount of money you think you're worth. I mean, there's tons of ways of getting caught in that monotony. I mean, you could just wake up one day and be super unhappy with the whole life you've created if you don't ever wake up. I mean, at least if you wake up, you have the option to do something. But I mean, it's that initial spark of awareness that is sometimes hard to find, and sometimes people don't ever find it. That's why I think that we are living in the zombie apocalypse, because there's so many people asleep and so many people that are caught in the monotony, and they only wake up very short periods of time. I've seen tons of people in my life where you're talking to them and talking to them and talking to them, and you're saying the same thing to them over and over and over, trying to get them to hear what you're saying and trying to get them to wake up. And I mean, then you see them finally wake up one day for like an hour, and they finally hear all the things that you've been saying for the last few months, and they finally get it, and you think, great, things are gonna change, and then they get caught up in their monotony again, and like the next day they're gone. Like the next day they're back asleep again, and then you're thinking like, shit, like they finally got it, they finally understood, you know, what I've been trying to say to them all along. They finally saw the light, and now they've fallen back asleep. So now how long is it gonna take to get them awake again, right? So all the things that you thought were gonna now change and get better are all of a sudden not gonna get better again, because they're sleeping again. That's why it's important to realize that no matter how much good you can see for a person and how much good you can wish for a person, you're never gonna change a person, because they already have to be awake and have to be capable of seeing through the monotony to the point where they're not sleeping. I mean, if you're getting to a relationship with someone who is asleep and you're trying to wake them up, I mean, you will see times where the spark will come alive and they will wake up. But like I said, it's not going to last very long. They're used to letting their ego catch them in the monotony. They're used to not being awake. They're used to being asleep. So how can you expect someone who's used to being asleep to be awake more often than what they're asleep? They're not going to be. I mean, they can make the choice eventually to wake up, and they can make the choice to stay awake, but sometimes you fall asleep and you were intending to stay awake and you fall asleep because that's what you're used to. That's your default mode. So that's why you can't change people. That's why if you get into a relationship with someone that's asleep, they're most likely going to always stay asleep, and you can't expect that to change because you can't expect them to get better. So you're just better off just waiting for a better person, waiting for a person that's already awake, than what you are of thinking that maybe you have a chance of changing this person. Because I mean, I know that almost everything is perfect except for a few things, or seems perfect except for a few things, but those few things and those few problems always seem to snowball into bigger problems. So to stop that, you need to get together with someone where there's no issues. And I know you think, well, the world's not perfect, I'm never gonna find anybody where we don't have issues. But like I said, if you're getting together with someone who's more awake than what they are sleeping, you'll have a way better chance of overcoming and changing the things that are problems than you will with someone that's asleep.